Carlos, hey, congratulations for being part of the Hot Zone.
Thanks, Gig. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's an honor to be a part of that show.
It's terrific. It's a very thrilling ride. I didn't know the real details of what actually happened, but let's start off with that easy question. What initially attracted you to a project like the Hot Zone, Anthrax?
I mean, listen, the when Disney calls, you answer the phone, and when Nat Geo's attached to it as well, then you definitely pay attention. No, I mean, especially after COVID, it was one of those one of those calls that I got that was substantial, not just because of the timing of the contract, but because of the story. I was born in 1978, so I'm actually old enough to remember 9/11, and then the weeks after. Being from Canada, obviously, I have a different perspective of it. But in Toronto, we always feel a bit akin to New York City and to the bigger New York cities, to the bigger American cities rather. But the Anthrax story, it stuck around for so long, and I keep talking about this to colleagues and friends alike, that a story that sticks around, standing right next to the Twin Towers falling in 2001, and is around this long, and still nobody's really clear on what happened. It's got to be told, and for me to be a part of it, absolutely, and to be on the medical side for a change.
Well, tell us how much background research did you make before delving into this role?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Simon Kurz is a composite of several scientists that Bruce Ivans worked with. So as soon as, as an actor, as soon as I get the audition, I start doing a preliminary research, and then things can either really develop from there before I even book the job, or, okay, that's enough for now. This one, I knew kind of everything about the story before the audition happened. Just because it's a fascinating story. Reading it took me back to that time too. It's like, oh yeah, the Anthrax. And Tom Daschle, why do I know that name as a Canadian? It's because he was one of the senators and whatnot. So the research that I was able to do led me to find out that a lot of his colleagues to this day, or to 2009, 2011, where I found the footage, defended him and the theory that one person could not do this. And if that one person had to be Bruce Ivans, it's not him. That's not who that guy is. You know what I mean? So to me, that was all I needed to hear in terms of how to dive into the story. And then I met Tony Goldwyn, and I could defend anything that guy plays, any character. Like, I've got a huge spot in my heart for Tony. And he does such a beautiful job with Bruce. And, he's a complicated character, Bruce Ivans, but he's a lovable guy. And the story takes it so many different ways that you really see all the sides of him. So for Simon, his colleague at the lab, everything I could put into that character came from a belief that this is one of us. If it happens to Bruce, it could happen to me. And at the time, there was a lot of, I don't want to call it paranoia, because there were real threats. There was real danger everywhere. So I think the tension that was around at that time, it made people look at each other, even within their own circles, within their professional circles and personal circles. All of a sudden, you felt like you didn't really know anybody. So yeah, I mean, that's the starting point for it. And then everything else is just, being open to responding to what Tony's doing. I had the pleasure of doing 2 scenes with Daniel Day Kim. So yeah, the research takes me so far, and then I just show up open and ready to play, and the rest we'll see.
Was it such a relief that Dr. Simon Kurz was not based on a specific person, and that you could mold the character to whoever you want, unlike everybody else?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I was watching Harry Hamlin's great performance of Tom Brokaw last night, and thought to myself, I don't know if I could specify. Rico Cointoni shows up as Mayor Giuliani a little bit later on, and he's a fellow Canadian, actor, and I love, I was on Flashpoint, and he's a lovable, wonderful guy too. So I look at my colleagues representing these big figures, not just in this story, but in the American sort of fabric. for those two in particular, it was a relief. It was. I would have welcomed the challenge to embody someone. I'm doing a play in the spring in Canada, based on a Canadian writer, Milton Crane, Milton Acorn. Pardon me, I knew I got it wrong. Who was a real guy, and I don't get to do that very often. So that's a different challenge, and obviously that stage. But for this story, I was happy to look at the information in front of me, look at the person that they cast, and then just let it all sort of, come out as they liked it.
So tell us the truth. Do you know anything scientific that was going on through this entire series?
Listen, we talked about this. Tony and Daniel talked about this, and Kelly and Brian, the showrunners, doing this show during COVID. The parallels were abound. The irony. I spend most of my time in the lab in this BLS-4 suit, bio-level safety 4. It's like the safest suit on Earth. In March of 2021, before I even had my first vaccine, but it took 4 people to get me in the suit, right? So it's this whole dance of wow, this is going to be really safe and amazing. But then I'm maskless because it's, in 2001. So it was a challenging thing to wrap my head around the science that we were playing while making sure I was comfortable with the science that we were living, if that makes sense. So I did learn a lot, though. I mean, the aerosolization of anthrax and what it was initially used for. Bruce Ivins was working on vaccines, right? It's a medical. It's a natural occurring compound. I'm getting that wrong, I'm sure, to answer your question. But it's something fascinating that we can find these things in Earth, and then we can take it to the medical level, which is usually what people start doing with it. And then somebody comes along and says, hold on, though, what if we can weaponize this and make everybody really scared? So, we end up with a good television series out of it. And, as they were telling us, the poster says last night, you remember the headlines, but not the details. Yeah. So, and, these two characters, it follows them quite parallel too, like Matthew Riker, played by Daniel Day Kim, as the FBI agent who's just on a dogged pursuit. He's a scientist himself. So he knows before most people know what the potential malice behind this is. And that's key, because that just drives him. And Bruce Ivins, on the other hand, very different characters, but just as passionate about what they're doing, what they're seeking, and what they're trying to dispel, because both of them are dealing with, I don't want to call it ignorance, because an FBI director doesn't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of how anthrax gets aerosolized into a weapon. That's why he has Agent Matthew Riker. But when they don't listen to Agent Matthew Riker, then you end up with all these things. And on Bruce's side, of course, he becomes kind of a central focus of the investigation, in spite of all the good he was trying to do with his love of science. So it's fascinating, and those two meet on screen not very often. So when they do, it's time.
Absolutely. I'm curious, when you, like you mentioned, it took 4 people to get you into that biohazard suit. I can't imagine that was comfortable, right?
No, it wasn't. But it's as much about cooperation as it is about trust. Yeah. It took 4 people the first time. The second time it took 3, right? It took, let's say, 2.5 minutes the first time. The second time it took 1 minute and 15 seconds. Because you also have 15 minutes to spend beside each other in a 24-hour period. So all these clocks are going off. David Conroy, our health and safety guru, was there with the stopwatch, basically, as they're doing their best, and they're also supplying us air, right? These suits were the real deal. So for me, my comfort level was tested most when I could feel the air supply change, and how quickly that could happen too, because it's a tube that comes in through the suit, and if you sit on it, basically, or if you twist it into the wrong position. So for me, the safety, I felt totally taken care of the whole time by the crew. The protocols that were in place, what are we in, 8 months ago, in March 2021, seemed so severe. As I sit in LaGuardia Airport, maskless but with distance and with 2 vaccinations in me, I look back and it's a brave thing that everybody endeavored, and things did have to stop a couple times, but they were prepared. And yeah, kudos and thank you. I felt totally protected.
now, I know you did mention Tony's performance before, but specifically, I wanted to know, like, because I watched the series and I forgot Tony was even there, because he transformed into Bruce so well that I didn't even realize it was Tony anymore. I mean, was that the same feeling for you when you were acting alongside with him?
I mean, absolutely. I met Tony Goldwyn the first time when I watched Ghost as a what was I, 10 or 11-year-old, right? And then of course President Fitzgerald. But then no, when I met him, he's the realest, most kindest person that I've met. And then we get to set, and Bruce Ivans is obviously a completely different person from Tony. And the nuance that he brought to everything that Bruce is thinking, everything that Bruce is wanting. He's just a very thoughtful person, and that sort of transcends into his craft. Tony has a theater background, and I really feel like he invests himself as fully into a role for any medium. And I think that's something that's not unique to any type of personality, but to somebody that can, technically speaking, bring the level of nuance that he does to Bruce Ivans in this series and still make it watchable on screen. It's this dance, because Bruce Ivans is, as Tony called him last night, he's a weird guy, and you have to play those things. You have to show those things. That's the story we're telling, is this eccentric, brilliant, weird guy. So watching the nuances develop as the story goes on. We shot it chronologically, which is another gift that we don't always get. But to watch the transformation from Tony meeting him at the wardrobe fitting and then into the show, and as Bruce developed, and Simon and Bruce have their own relationship throughout as colleagues. And Vanessa Matsui plays Jodie Hall, our colleague in the same lab. So the three of them have this dynamic that revolves around Bruce, and Tony made that no task at all. He's just a charming guy that knows what level of Bruce to bring, and it was a joy to watch. It was really a pleasure. And as I was saying before, like, as an actor coming into a role like this, to have so much to play off of is really, I feel so lucky,
Now, you also, like Tony, have a theater background.
Oh yeah, sure.
And when you get roles like this,
not quite like Tony, but
Brian
Bryan Cranston keeps calling me, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, kid, go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you get roles like this, do you make significant adjustments to your acting, or do you basically, treat any acting job really much the same?
Well, that's a good question that I think a lot of actors have to ask ourselves. As the medium of film and television, as the mediums of film and television get smaller and smaller, and less and less, to put it that way, the adjustment becomes more necessary, and also larger. Right now, there's a lot of space, I think, still in the camera mediums to play with style into a place where it becomes more theatrical. But then you go into more like a dogma type thing, or like, something that that is really hard to pull off, which is like a larger style, larger scale television show. Nicola Cry-DeMute is my wife, who's also a very talented actor, and she is constantly reminding me that I'm not on stage when I'm auditioning or when I'm preparing for a role. Less is more. You really have to trust the words. You have to trust your face to not do anything while you're speaking. But that's the technicality of it, and that's the challenge that I do welcome. You know, there are parts of theater that I miss when I'm performing on camera. But that's just an opportunity to find things that I love about these little weird things that we get to do with the camera that we don't get to do in front of 500 to 3,000 people live. So yeah, it's just to celebrate. Like, it's you can call it an adjustment, or just an opportunity to dig deeper into what we can do with what we're doing with technology, and also, how we're differentiating these stories, because at the end of the day, we have to tell stories that matter. We have to tell stories that are relevant. And if I have to adapt my acting style so that message gets across, I'm happy to play that part.
Most excellent. And this is an excellent project with a very important message. One last question for you, Carlos, before I let you go, is what's your final thoughts on Bruce Ivans? What as a character, and whether he did it or not.
Oh, are you asking Carlos or are you asking Simon?
I'm asking Carlos.
You're asking Carlos. Listen, Carlos thinks that he doesn't like speaking in the third person, but I think that I don't think Bruce did it myself. I don't think I don't see the connections into his motivation. Honestly, there's nothing that I could glean from the story that I was a part of telling, and the story that I read that my colleagues were busy telling when I wasn't there. Reasonable doubt abound. Let me put it that way. But all the more reason for people to make up their own minds. It's over. It's a 3-night sort of trial. If you look at it that way, it's an exciting opportunity for people to decide.
Most excellent. I think when people watch the Hot Zone Anthrax, they'll have to decide on their own on what they actually watch, and the evidence is actually out there. Well,
definitely.
Carlos, hey, congratulations once again for the Hot Zone Anthrax. Thank you for carrying this conversation with us about the series and everything else with it.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.